Congress certifies Donald Trump's victory in the 2024 election. Donald Trump calls on Congress to bundle all of his initiatives into one big bill. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announces his resignation once a new Liberal Party leader is chosen. We have those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Monday, January 6th, and that means that today is the 4th anniversary of the January 6th Capitol protest. Now, this event would provide fodder for years for the Democratic Party with their campaign ads, and it was billed as one of the worst days in American history. If you're a Trump supporter, this January 6th is truly something to celebrate. So joining me now to discuss is Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze News, and Steve Baker, Blaze News investigative journalist. So Steve, let's start with you because Kamala Harris is out there today certifying the presidential election results, and the leftists, they were out there calling Trump literally Hitler, right? That's nowhere to be found anymore. We'll get the peaceful transfer of power. So what does this say about the Democratic Party's previously characterization of Trump when they were going out there saying all these things, and yet we can still find some peace today on January 6th?
Yeah, ironically, guess where I was during the certification? I was sitting inside the U.S. Capitol's House chamber. I was in the press gallery with my press badge. And I watched a very, very cordial and peaceful transfer of power. Look, they certified the election. They applauded for their team when it was time to applaud for their team. And then the other guys applauded for their team when they announced their particular win in a particular state. But at the end, when it was all said and done and the total was finally announced and the Electoral College votes were absolutely certified 100%. They all stood, they all applauded, and they all behaved themselves. It was a good day. Now, the Capitol was largely empty today. In fact, there was more police presence there than there was anything else. Far more cops, it appeared to be on and inside the Capitol grounds and inside the Capitol building than were actually than total congressmen and the people in the gallery that had been invited, especially because the Capitol itself was closed to the public today.
Steve, it's been a hell of a 4 years since the last time you were in that building. I have to ask you, tell us all what it was like to go back. I mean, you sent me some pictures from some of the sites that we've been reporting on. You've been reporting on for us, key places in the Capitol where some of these stories occurred. But what was that like to walk through again today with a press badge? I assume no one gave you a ticket or anything like that. What was this like?
I'll tell you what, something really exciting happened for me. And it was validation for the work that we've done, especially since I've been with the Blaze. And Julio Rosas was with me during this time. But we were looking for asking directions for a particular place, and I stopped a plainclothes Capitol Police officer, and I started asking him where to go, or maybe he reached out to me and said, "Gentlemen, do you need directions?" I think that's how it happened. And I started answering him, and he said, "Why do I recognize your voice? Why do I recognize your voice? Say something again." And so I'm just talking to him, and then he goes, "Oh, you're the guy that does all those videos on Harry Dunn. Come with me, come with me." And he took us over and introduced us to another plainclothes cop who took us over into the corner. And I mean, they were thanking us profusely for the work that they'd done. He said, "The only people in this building that don't like what you've done are the white shirts upstairs, the chiefs and the assistant chiefs. But the line officers, the plainclothes officers, they all, as he said, they all read our stuff. They all watch our videos, and they're very thankful for the work that we've done in exposing the corruption upstairs."
Well, we see that Donald Trump is out there still saying that he plans on pardoning over 1,000 J6ers on day one. Of course, that's going to affect you and your life. What is your take, just as you see this continue to play out, as this day does get closer to Donald Trump taking over and him saying that?
I think that it's going to have a significant impact, not just on the individuals, not just myself, not the others who have been treated and more harshly prosecuted and persecuted than myself, but I think that there's time now to, they talk about national healing. And this is one of those moments where I think that we all just need to accept that, left, right, middle, whatever. Most people, I will tell you, just from even my own social media feeds in the last 2 days, still do not understand January 6th. And indeed, both left and right, they operate in a lot of misinformation, a lot of conspiracy theories related to that day. And I think that this will be the first step towards that national healing, is when Trump does in fact issue those pardons. Now the question is, how deep will he go? How far will he go? Will it just be the nonviolent offenders? But there are hundreds of nonviolent felony offenders as well. So I hope that those are also on the list.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And they're going to continue to prosecute people apparently right up until the day power changes. But let's talk about something else. It's a major part of January 6th that you've been reporting on. The FBI has still failed to find the January 6th bomber. A House report chalks this up to egregious security failures.
Right.
Let's talk about some of those failures.
Well, if we start with the failures on January 6th, the first and most obvious thing is, in contrast, what we're looking at today. They have the most ridiculous and high security cordoned off perimeter around the Capitol and around all the Senate and House office buildings as well. They have the big 10-foot non-scalable fence up everywhere. The boundaries of the fence are much further out than where they were January 6th 4 years ago, when they only had bike rack boundaries. And so it's a much further extended perimeter. The police presence is absolutely, it's almost oppressive, to be honest with you. And they are everywhere, both inside and out. But there was nothing really to prepare for today. In fact, while I was on the streets walking through and trudging through the snow, every time I would see cops with their tactical gear on and their rifles, I would say, "Hey guys, where's the action today? Where's it going to be today?" And we're like, we don't think there's going to be anything happening today. And it's not, because we got a big snowstorm overnight, and woke up to a winter wonderland here in the Capitol this morning. And as a result of that, things have been pretty quiet.
You know, we were interacting recently over the break, and Chief Sund made this comment on Twitter about how the pipe bombs are perhaps the key to unraveling January 6th. I was curious, quick, your thoughts on that. Do you think that's true?
It's absolutely true, whether it's myself.
By the way, let me just say for our audience that the chief is a former chief of the Capitol Police who's been on this show and is very angry about what happened to him that day.
Yeah, and this is another area of not only that reflects on the lack of preparation that day, because there were so few Capitol Police officers on duty on January 6th of 2021 that when the two alleged, as we know now, fake pipe bombs were found, one at the RNC, one at the DNC headquarters. Once those two pipe bombs were found, 5, 10, 15 minutes either side of the initial barricade breach at 12:53 on J6, that then caused a diversion, which pulled even more officers away from the Capitol. They had to send a contingency to the RNC, then they had to send a contingency to the DNC. As a result of that, they had fewer officers at the Capitol. As I said, an already undermanned force. But Chief Sund is absolutely correct. If we find out the answer, or if the FBI ever discloses the answer, or if new incoming director Kash Patel gets to the bottom of this and releases what we know probably exists, then it's going to unravel everything. I believe that. Joe Hanneman believes that. Darren Beatty, who's done probably more work on the pipe bomb than anybody else for Revolver News, he believes that. And I think that Stephen Sund is absolutely right. And if one of the great injustices was him having to fall on the sword the day after January 6th, I hope they give him his job back.
Well, Steve, we've all really appreciated the work that you've done on January 6th, but at some point we are going to have to move on to other topics with you. I know you have a ton of stories in the works right now, so can you give us a little preview of some of that stuff that you're working on right now?
Yeah, Joe and I have a story coming out probably tomorrow. He's been waiting on me all day to tighten up one paragraph, I think, before we can release it. But we're going to start showing some pretty incredible things that our government is hiding from us. We've been hearing a lot about the drones. And of course, Glenn Beck this morning was talking about the drone technology and what the government has been hiding from us there. But just as important is the weapon technologies that they have invested in called directed energy weapons. We've all heard about the Havana syndrome, but it goes much, much, much deeper than that. And we know now, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that then General Mark Milley, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the first Trump administration, we know that on June 1st of 2020, during the BLM post-George Floyd death riots that were happening here in the nation's capital, that he authorized the use of both, and I quote, heat and sound directed energy weapons to be used on that crowd. And believe it or not, Joe and I found the evidence.
It is going to be a must read. Steve, thanks so much for joining us today.
Jill, thank you so much. And it's good to have you guys all back in the saddle again.
Yes. Peterson, when we look at this, January 6th, I mean, of course, we had to have Steve Baker on today. And as he was saying, he was just walking around the Capitol in a much different scene this time around.
Yeah, I love seeing that badge on him. Looks good. Looks good. And there will be a video. Steve was working on this today of him kind of taking you around the Capitol to some of the key places and walking the walk that he walked 4 years ago.
Yeah, and as Steve said, Julio Rosas was with him today. We'll have him on with us. We'll take a look at all of the unanswered questions from January 6th coming up. As we welcome a new year, there's time to focus on what matters most, and that's creating a healthy habit, enjoying more time in the moments with your family, and spending less money on going out to eat. And GoodRanchers.com, they're here to help you turn all of your resolutions into solutions. When you buy your meat from Good Ranchers, you're going to support the local farms and ranches, and you're going to skip all that imported meat from the grocery store. Good Ranchers delivers high quality, 100% American meat straight to your door, so you can start 2025 with better choices and better meals and really better moments at home. Visit GoodRanchers.com and use my code Jill to claim $25 off plus free express shipping and get your choice of free ground beef, chicken, or salmon in every order for an entire year. So you can spend more time with your family and less time and less money going out to eat. Just really go there and enjoy all that quality, nutritious American food that's on your New Year's resolution list this year. And make sure to visit GoodRanchers.com and use my code Jill for the meat that will be delivered to your door. GoodRanchers.com, code Jill for $25 off and get free meat in your box for a year. GoodRanchers.com, American meat delivered. Steve Baker wasn't the only Blaze personality on the Capitol grounds today. Julio Rosas, our national correspondent for Blaze Media, was also on the scene, and he joins us now. So, Julio, let's get straight into it. I want to know what the differences were when you were out there for this year's election for the certification, all the way back 4 years ago in 2021 on the infamous now January 6th.
Well, even it was really different even from what I was wearing last year, or 4 years ago. I was wearing my riot gear, and today I'm wearing what you see right now, my shirt from Mexico. I mean, what really, looking back on that time is that it just highlights how unnecessary it was. And when I say that, I mean that this was the most preventable riot that I've ever covered in my career, and I've covered quite a few. Right? I even ran into one of the police officers that kind of became a celebrity, Daniel Hodges, when I was waiting outside the security perimeter. And he asked me, after I asked him what he thought about, this time, and he asked me, well, what did you think about it? And I said, well, it was weird. And he goes, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, where was all this? And I'm pointing to this fencing, the extra law enforcement. I saw cops from New York City. There were police from nearby Maryland providing extra security. I even saw a Humvee drive by. And it's just and he kind of quieted down after that, because I could tell that he didn't really like my answer. But it just shows that the ability to stop anything from happening the government was able to do that, right? But for whatever reason, I just cannot stress enough. For whatever reason, January 6th did not happen in a vacuum. We had just come off a very violent year from the left, right? The federal courthouse in Portland, which part of which I covered, it had the same fencing because it was under constant attack. There was a massive riot, you can even say insurrection, outside the White House early on when things had kicked off during that time, and so this was preventable. It didn't need to get to this point, and so really we still don't really have an answer as to why DC leadership dropped the ball on this. And in many ways, I really think that January 6th was allowed to happen because, I mean, now you look at it as a political tool. In some ways, it's almost like a religious event because you had Chuck Schumer having a Presbyterian, I believe, priest give a prayer at the site where the first window was breached, right? So, I mean, there's like this religious connotation to it. And so it's weird, even to this day. To me, it's weird. It's just a lot, it's a lot because obviously that did change a lot of trajectories. It changed a lot of people's lives for better and for worse. And it's not going to be a topic that we're going to stop talking about anytime soon, at least coming from the Democrats. Obviously this is going to be something that's going to be brought up for a very, very long time. And for me, it's like, okay, well, we could have avoided all this, but people in positions of power didn't do their job.
Julio, given that it became, like as you said, almost this, religious object, very strange. It was the hammer that the Democrats used to beat on the right for 3.5 years at least. I mean, really right up until recently. And given all that, I know there was a snowstorm today, so obviously that would prevent people from showing up. But did you hear of anything really being planned, or was anything happening today in reference to it? In other words, is it true that the left has just kind of let it go?
No. Well, so for today, I didn't hear anything about it. That's why I wasn't originally planning on coming to DC, because it's like, well, it's no protest. All right, I'm not interested. But for right now, and it's kind of to be expected, right? Most of the left's reaction to Trump is actually going to be starting on January 20th. So there are protests planned for here in DC for the 20th. So I'll be out here covering all of that. And I will admit, I'm a little bit surprised at the muted reaction from the left, even from the far left, in terms of the street action that really kicked off after he won the first time back in 2016. And so I think part of it is just demoralization, because obviously a lot of them didn't want Trump to be back in office. And so I think the protests will kind of kick back up once policies like these deportations will go into effect. Kind of, any issue that they really have this, pet, kind of this pet issue, the migration one being probably the top that's going to have the most change after, 4 disastrous years at the border and immigration as a whole. So we'll see. We'll see how much the far left is going to be motivated to continue what they did during the first term into now the second term, but obviously it wasn't back to back. It was kind of, a 4-year break in between. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens, unless, of course, there is another snowstorm, not unheard of. But past that, we'll see how the street activists will kind of carry on their direct action once Trump's policies actually starts taking effect all across the country.
What do you expect on Inauguration Day, on January 20th itself, right? You know that there's going to be a protest out there. You are kind of our protest whisperer, if you will. You're the one that's on the scene for us every time. What do you expect there for January 20th?
Well, like I said, I don't know. I mean, there will be a significant amount of people, again, barring weather. If it's clear, I'll expect a lot of people, because obviously Washington, D.C., very liberal city, so you'll have the homegrown people, but there will be people traveling in from from the rest of the country to protest. Because, I mean, 2016, right, there was that small riot where, they burned that limousine that belonged to an immigrant. But what kind of made me take pause was there wasn't really any reaction on election night. Because if people remember, that's what got me interested in journalism right away, because I saw after Trump won against all odds, there was an immediate reaction. I mean, I remember seeing on Twitter back then where college students in California, because it was still kind of early for them, they just started walking around protesting on their campus because they were so angry about Trump winning. So there, that didn't really happen. There was a protest yesterday here in D.C., but it was like 20, year old Gen Xers. Just still say, being like the old resistance. Obviously, they're not going to really do anything crazy. So that's not to say there's not going to be anything happening, but I suspect that obviously with more people, there's more chances of things kind of going haywire. So I don't know how big it will be though, because the women's march that took place right after in 2017 was pretty huge. It's pretty significant. But then as the years moved on, the numbers dwindled and dwindled, more and more. So I think maybe that reduction in size will kind of continue into this year. But I don't know. I'll be very fascinated to see what actually happens in January 20th. And all I got to say is it better be worth it, because, coming from Florida, I'm still going to be cold when I come in D.C. So if I'm going to be out there in the cold, it better be worth it. That's all I'm saying.
It better be worth it. It was worth it today, Julio. Thanks so much for covering that for us. I don't know if we're going to see a summer of riots again this year. Peterson, what do you think?
I mean, it's weird because logic tells you, well, this should still be going on. But they're definitely the feeling of what's going, if I just use instinct and look around, it does look like, the air is out, they're just out of air and they're not revved up. And so today was a good example. I don't think there was anything planned, even if there wasn't a snowstorm. I think he's right. I mean, Inauguration Day, there might be some stuff, but I don't see it. I don't see the fire.
Well, when we come back, Chris Bedford will tell us about the change in the air, and he'll explain why corporations are crawling back to Donald Trump. Just ahead. The certification of the 2024 election may have been one of the last standing obstacles in the way of Trump's America First agenda. And joining us now to break down today's events is Chris Bedford. He's our senior editor for politics. So, Chris, in your latest Beltway brief, you wrote that today, on the 4-year anniversary of the Capitol protests, this marks the end of the corporate resistance. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, remember 4 years ago, you had companies like Amazon and Apple that were actively making decisions to take major internet companies off, like Parler, to destroy American companies simply for allowing Trump supporters to be able to have a voice. It was a crazy, crazy, crazy time and a full-blown attack on the American dream. Now you've got Amazon and Jeff Bezos and Tim Cook from Apple, each donating $1 million to the Trump inaugural committee. They've finally realized that there's a lot of pain that comes from the American people and potentially from Washington for putting partisanship and left-wing ideology before unity, before even profits, like a lot of these companies did. Partisanship, after the 2016 surprise election, sank into every aspect of Washington, D.C., and every aspect of virtually every major boardroom in America that felt like they had to do something to resist. But now they realize it's not exactly as bad as they thought it was. They've had 4 years under Trump. They've had 4 years under Biden. All of the things that they want are things that Trump initially campaigned on. It seems almost quaint. He's back, and he's not just some kind of irritable aberration in the American political scene. He is the symptom of something that now has the popular vote that got, I think, almost a third of voters of color. This is something that's going to continue. They may have another 8 years after that of J.D. Vance. And they're really freaked out. Like, they're totally terrified about this entire thing. They used to be able to go call up Grover Norquist over at ATR or call up people at Competitive Enterprise Institute or AEI and say, hey, we give you a bunch of money. Now connect us with Republicans so that they'll do our corporate bidding. But all these different groups that have previously been very business-friendly Republican groups, they're kind of lost. They don't know the incoming administration. They don't know the incoming appointees. A lot of them burnt a huge amount of their credit fighting on behalf of tech companies, fighting conservative Republicans, fighting MAGA populists, and now they don't have it. So these companies are adrift. They're trying to donate as much money as they can to try and get back into that game.
Chris, I love the way you basically explained the reason why they're afraid, which is that the people who are in power now, at least a significant number of people under Trump, are not and don't care, about this agenda. In other words, the strength of the Trump movement is setting the entire world on fire for these people. But isn't it the danger? What do you think about this? I mean, the danger is this. Let me put it in the cultural terms first. With Hollywood, for instance, what they're going to do is basically Yellowstone everything, right? I mean, they'll co-opt they'll co-opt, the mantras, they'll take on the guise of Red State America, but it'll be the same agenda. They'll nod to it, but they'll use it for their own purposes. They've done this for a long time. It's why every major news anchor was from Texas. The Texas vibe and accent is comforting to all of Americans. It signals sort of normal red America, but the person they'll have mouthing it is still a lunatic, a lefty, or someone who espouses those leftist values. So in terms of these companies, isn't the same thing going to happen? In other words, they'll use the language of populism and everything else and try to insinuate themselves into the coalition in order to take advantage of it.
I mean, that's what Barack Obama did too. Remember, he used to read books about Reagan. He went out and see his State of the Union speeches. It kind of sounded like you were listening to a conservative Republican, but then you'd go out and do the policy. It was completely different. Yeah, that's a threat. I mean, there's no slowdown to the crazy in Hollywood. I mean, last night, Wicked didn't win the Golden Globe for Best Musical. It lost to a somehow gayer and more foreign musical. I don't understand exactly where they found it. Some kind of transgender shtick. That's the way Hollywood is. They're not going to change. Businesses, however, might actually start to change. One thing that Bill Barr was doing at the end of Donald Trump's administration was he sent out a letter saying that racial discrimination in the workplace is going to include white people, so please send letters and tips in. The last 8 years, especially the last 4 years of this moral crusade, corporate boardrooms and partners at major firms have been quaking in fear at their junior HR departments. But if you actually have a DOJ that starts to empower discrimination lawsuits for all the different times that you were dragged into a seminar to be told how bad you were for being a white male or a white woman or whoever else, an Asian, white adjacent male, or what have you, you may be able to have a lawsuit over that. Well, that starts to shut that stuff down, because then the lawyers get involved and they say, hey, little HR people, it's been fun. We let you be in charge for a little while, play dictator. You went too far. So Hollywood's still going to be crazy. Campuses are still going to be crazy, for sure. The newspapers are not going to change. The press is not really going to change. But I do think that some of the business culture is going to start to return to a little bit of normalcy. I mean, that's important. I mean, Bank of America gave $1 billion to Black Lives Matter. This was a company, or Black Lives Matter is a movement that was associated with the murder of 5 Dallas police officers just a few years prior. Everyone pretended to have complete amnesia about what Black Lives Matter was when they came back, and $1 billion was given to a radical, violent movement. I think that you may see some of that start to tone off.
Chris, let's dive into the Trump agenda, because we've seen the 119th Congress now sworn in, and Trump is out there saying that he wants one big bill. He said border security, all of the energy, all of the tax on tips. He wants to look at the Trump tax cuts as well in one bill, he says, by Memorial Day. So why does he want this in one big, beautiful bill, Chris?
He's got to. It's weird. In Washington, generally speaking, it's much easier to pass massive pieces of legislation than it is to pass small pieces of legislation. I mean, it doesn't matter what you ran on, what you're elected on, what the American people want. You have a hard time passing, for example, Obamacare repeal, because someone's going to get annoyed. And if you try to do this right now, Trump's agenda into two parts. One, taxes. Usually taxes just sail right through Washington. Everyone's for it. But these are different. These taxes impact you and me and everyone who's watching. They don't impact Wall Street as much. That's what's going to expire. So there's not as much movement in Washington to actually take care of middle-class families as you would see if it was big corporations. Two, you've got the other part of this, which is originally going to be the second part of this bill, or the first part of two separate bills, was to provide money to enforce deportations, border security, internal security, and to get that major prong of the MAGA and Donald Trump agenda through. But at the end of the day, you've still got people like Collins and Murkowski who just aren't going to vote for that. However, those two politicians have a great thing about them. They're extremely transactional. If you could pay them, then they'll go back and say, yes, I voted for this, and look what I brought to Maine. Look what I brought to Alaska. Fine. That's what you get when you get one big bill that goes beyond immigration. You basically include bribes for all these different people. You're able to get taxes across the finish line that protects the middle class, so people can be making these decisions ahead of time before the actual expiration, and trying to actually make economic decisions based on that going into the future, reviving the economy in a lot of different ways. That's why it's got to be one big, beautiful bill, because essentially Washington needs to be bribed to do its job.
Chris, let's move on to Biden. As we all three of us like to remind people on this show, there actually is a president of the United States right now, and a vice president. Many people have forgotten about them. We're not sure who they are, but those offices still exist. And so we have Biden with just 2 weeks left in his term announcing a ban on all new offshore oil and gas drilling along the Atlantic coast, the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and Pacific waters. Why is he doing this with so little time left in his term? Can this be overturned? What's going on here?
I mean, he's doing it because he's an ideologue, or at least his staff are ideologues, and they probably slipped it in front of him and said, "You're still president," and sign this. Obama did the exact same thing when he left office, and it's not a problem. It honestly needs a legislative fix, and unfortunately, I don't think you could fix it through reconciliation, which is the only way you can pass things to the Senate with 51 votes as opposed to 60, and it makes it so it has to do with budget. This would go beyond that because it basically goes off of a 7-year-old Conservation Act that makes it very easy for presidents to add land, but since it's a Conservation Act, makes it very difficult for presidents to take that land out of conservation. So in the last couple of weeks and months of his administration, Obama did this, and then Joe Biden's doing the same. And what's going to end up happening is Donald Trump's going to come in. They're quickly going to try to undo it. And then all these left-wing environmentalist groups that work hand in glove with the Democrats are going to sue. And then any kind of offshore oil drilling is going to be delayed for 1 year or 2 years. And they're going to go to a friendly left-wing court, and they're going to say, this can't happen. So maybe it'll be held up at that point indefinitely. There's a huge nexus between the left-wing environmental groups that sue, the judges that they work with, the Democratic Party that they donate with, the fines that they take out of different companies that then they give to this nonprofit world. It's a very powerful ecosystem. So when you hear things about how big oil is going to do this or that, or big energy, and they try to imagine themselves as if they're Earth Day in the 1970s, there's a bunch of hippies out there. The reality is completely the inverse. The billions and billions of dollars are circulated by the global warming fanatics, by a lot of the no American energy fanatics. And those people are so much better funded and so much more willing to fight than American oil and gas companies. It's a dangerous opponent.
Well, Bedford, it's so good to see you again. And we will say some prayers that the kids in D.C. will make it back to school at some point this week.
We're entering week 3 of Christmas vacation. It's been so much family time.
So much family time. Well, we're thankful to have you back here with us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks, Bedford.
See you then.
Don't go anywhere. Up next, we'll bid a fond farewell to Justin Trudeau right after this.
I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister, after the party selects its next leader.
Well, Trudeau's resignation came in earlier this morning, and he'll officially step aside in March. But what does this mean for the future of Canada? Here to discuss is Ezra Levant. He's a journalist and publisher of Rebel News. So, Ezra, we've been talking about this for a few weeks now. So why did Trudeau resign today?
Sure. Well, on Wednesday, his party caucus was going to have a meeting where everyone had resolved to fire him. He's being denounced by his own party members on a daily basis because he's so low in the polls. He's at 16%. I don't remember any party leader ever being that low in the polls. So he was doomed 48 hours from now, so he preempted things. He did 2 things. He asked the Governor General to dissolve Parliament so there can be no confidence vote, so no one can throw him out, and Parliament won't return until March 24th. So he's got 90 days of sort of a staycation. No one can fire him. At that meeting on Wednesday, they were going to try. He's free, but I was sort of tricked by his language. He says, I intend to resign, but not on March 24th. He says, whenever the Liberal Party of Canada chooses another leader. Well, we don't know when that's going to be. That could be months from now. And here's the crazy thing. The Liberal Party of Canada, which is going to choose a new leader, their rules are so loosey-goosey, foreign citizens are allowed to vote, and even people as young as 14 years old. So the next Prime Minister of Canada will not be chosen in a general election with citizens voting. It'll be chosen by an internal Liberal Party process where foreigners and children can choose. And by the way, our version of the CIA found that in the last election, the Chinese Communist Party bussed in Chinese nationals in 11 different districts in Canada to interfere in that same process. So we're in a mess. And by the way, 2 weeks from today, Donald Trump has said if we don't fix our border, he's going to bring big tariffs against Canada. So we've got the worst, weakest government in memory, and we've got this existential threat coming in 14 days.
Unbelievable. Ezra, tell us about the mood. What do you see across the landscape? What's the mood like in Canada?
You know, Justin Trudeau is not just disliked, he's hated. And this is not my opinion. The pollsters say, do you like him or like him a lot? Do you dislike him or dislike him a lot? And people don't just dislike Trudeau, they hate him. Every demographic group, every age group, every race, women and men. I've never seen anything like it. And I think they're just sick of him and they want him to leave the stage, but he will not. He's got a little bit of an authoritarian streak in him. He's never really been that democratic. Maybe it's a chip off the old block. People always said he was, you know, the secret love child of Fidel Castro and Margaret Trudeau. I don't know if that's true, but sometimes it sure seems that way. Remember, Trudeau once said, the country he most admires is communist China. The reason I tell you that is because Trudeau doesn't believe democracy applies to him. In fact, when he announced his future resignation today, he took no responsibility. He said the only reason he's going to resign sometime in the future is because his own party was bickering so much. He never takes any blame, never takes any responsibility, and he really doesn't care about democracy. Imagine dissolving your own parliament to avoid being fired. He's really treating the government as his own personal property, and that's dangerous when Donald Trump is coming with tariffs.
Well, Ezra, you laid out who you think, all the ways that all these people can be voting, but who do you think they're actually going to be voting for? Who are some of the names right now that are going to be in the mix for the next prime minister?
Well, and that's the thing. They're going to choose the prime minister within the Liberal Party, and only months after that will we have a general election. So the candidates to succeed Trudeau are going to be Liberals. His deputy prime minister, Chrystia Freeland, the former Bank of England governor, Mark Carney, who's a real carbon tax advocate. It almost doesn't matter because in that general election, the Conservative leader of Canada is going to blow them all away. According to polls, the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, is ahead by more than 20%. It's going to be a massacre. And sure, changing Liberal leaders might make a little bit of difference, but Canadians are so resolved. They're sick of this mess. It's even more than in the U.S. The last 4 years in America, a lot of Americans were just ready to get rid of Joe Biden, and then they switched to Kamala Harris as a bait and switch. That's sort of what Trudeau did. People are so sick of Trudeau, so they're going to do a switch. We don't know who our Kamala Harris is going to be, but whoever it is going to get massacred in the next election. As I would say to my American friends, this is a big drama going on right now, and it looks atrocious right now. But just give us a few months. Give us 6 months, and we're going to have an excellent, young, principled, conservative, smart prime minister who I think will get along well with Donald Trump and make our two countries stronger together. Don't judge. We're at our worst now. I'm almost embarrassed that the world is watching it. But if you can just give us a few more months, we'll be ready to deal with the world like grown-ups again.
Well, you know, Ezra, we can't say you're alone in this. In the U.S. right now, there still is a president, I think, I've heard, in power, and Trump hasn't quite taken office yet. But throughout the world in the West, we see a similar problem. The dynamic is not only a rising populism or conservatism, whatever you want to call it, but a struggle for that to take political form in a party and an organization that actually represents the people. So, you see in many of these European countries, for instance, this struggle against the immigration and everything else, but even the purported, conservatives don't actually do their bidding. Of course, famously in the U.S., Trump basically stands for the anti-establishment. He's the anti-establishment candidate on the right, kicking old Republicans out like Mitch McConnell. So how does that play here? It sounds like you're pretty high on this new guy, and like he is principled. He's gonna come up. Is there a party structure or a built-out conservative party that is strong in Canada and rising, or what?
Sure. Until now, I've been talking about the Liberal Party and their shenanigans, but let's switch to the Conservative Party. Yeah. You're right. We have a new Conservative Party leader in Canada named Pierre Poilievre. He replaced a conservative in name only called Erin O'Toole. Give me 1 minute on him. I don't know if you remember, but in February 2022, there was this huge trucker convoy that drove to Ottawa to oppose the lockdowns and the vaccine mandates, and it was this beautiful, huge, peaceful, freedom-loving grassroots protest. And the Conservative leader in that day said to his members of Parliament, "You're not allowed to go to talk to the truckers." Well, the Conservative Party threw out that Conservative in name only, Erin O'Toole, and elected a new, truly conservative leader named Pierre Poilievre. Now, obviously, he's not perfect, but he is so much better than that guy they chucked out. And I don't know. I think that he's going to be more in sync with the freedom and populist agenda of Donald Trump. Obviously, Pierre Poilievre's going to stand up for Canada. He's a Canada first guy, and he uses that phrase. But I think you can be Canada first, like Giorgia Meloni is Italy first. And you can get along with Donald Trump, America first, because you're dealing with nationalists who oppose globalism, who oppose carbon taxes, who oppose mass immigration. I think that Pierre Poilievre will be able to do business with Donald Trump. Let me give you an example. Canada is the largest exporter of oil to the United States. That's a security issue, an economic issue. Like, our two countries are so closely intertwined. Compare that to Trudeau, who was anti-oil, pro-carbon tax, anti-pipeline. So I think Americans are going to find a much more amenable partner. Let me give you one more quote from the new conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre. He says we've got to replace the woke culture in our military with a warrior culture. Well, that sounds like the United States spirit there. I think you're going to see more collegiality on foreign affairs. Trudeau was pro-Hamas. Pierre Poilievre is pro-Israel. So again, you're going to see an ally. I sometimes say you guys are 10 times bigger than Canada, population-wise. So you're the senior partner. It's like you're Batman and we're Robin. That's what I hope we can get back to. I don't like the fact that Trump and Trudeau were fighting. I think Trudeau picked a lot of stupid fights, but I think we can get past that when Poilievre takes over, God willing, in 6 months.
Ezra, better days are ahead. We'll give you that grace period of about 6 months or so, and we'll see you with better days ahead for Canada. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
I like that. Batman and Robin there, Matthew.
Hey, sounds good.
We actually have some hope there up north, as he was saying.
I think like he's saying, it was well said that when you do have a Canada first or any country that puts their own interests first and rejects globalism, they're going to get along. And what's really heartening is what he's saying about the rise of new leadership that really does stand for where a lot of Canadians are. And that's, if you have that, then he's absolutely right. We'll check in and see. Sounds good.
We will be watching, that's for sure. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back to wrap up the show right after this. Well, it is January 6th, and we had a much less eventful January 6th this time around, Matthew. There's not going to be a lot of stories written about today in the history books. This is just one of the peaceful transfers of power.
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing to behold. The quiet snow falling in D.C., a quiet Capitol. I saw from a video I saw earlier with Baker and others in the Capitol. There weren't a lot of people there, as they said. And that's a good thing. And you can see a kind of reclaiming of the day. The left is just dropping its bullcrap, and you can see people actually coming forth and telling the real story of what happened and reclaiming that from the left.
Well, it's a new day. It's a new year, right? This is our first show back in the new year. So what are our resolutions? What do we want to get done this year, right? It's 2025. I'm sure that we're going to have a lot that we're going to be diving into on Blaze News tonight.
Yeah, there's so much we're planning. I mean, both for the site and the show. And one thing that's really near and dear to, I think, everyone's heart here, and certainly mine, is we need more Steve Bakers in the world. We need more investigative journalism, breaking, doing stories that no one else will do. It has to be something that other people won't do. That's the stories we want to take on and bring to our audience.
There are plenty of those out there still. There are plenty.
Yeah, I mean, Baker's doing this one on directed energy weapons, which Catherine Harris just came out and said, well, the CIA was attacked by these from another country. Baker's saying, excuse me, we have these too, and maybe we've used them. Let's look into that. No one else is going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, but we will, and in a responsible way. So we need more investigative stories that really move the ball forward. That's number one. And then number two is something that you should talk about. I mean, this is something we were talking about earlier. We've brought a lot of, like, people have commented, hey, you guys are the only ones doing, crypto finance, some of the cutting edge stuff. You're actually talking about Bitcoin on your show and explaining it. I think that's really, really important. I mean, don't you?
That's because I'm obsessed with it and I want to talk about it. So we're going to bring it to you in 2025 in a bigger and better way. Yes, I love this is what I do in a lot of my free time is I'll be out there listening to the financial podcast. I was up at like 5 a.m. tweeting about bonds this morning, Matthew. This is just what I do. It's something that's interesting to me. And it's something that will, unfortunately, I think, in a very big way, impact the economy here pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, so you have to talk about what's going on in finance and technology right now, because if you don't talk about that, everyone's going to be unprepared for what is increasingly not just coming, but happening right every day as we move forward. And then the big picture, I think, for political news that is so important that no one else is really framing the right way is that the political story right now is not going to be about so much Trump versus the Democrats as it is Trump versus the administrative state, Trump versus the permanent state, Trump versus the deep state, Trump and his officials coming into power and having to directly attack these people who are ensconced in the U.S. government. And, you can't just go in and fire them. That's not how it works. You can't just say you're fired. He needs to, he has to, he wants to, but they're going to try to sort him in every way, in every agency and every department. And the Secretary of State, the rats are still hiding. And these guys got to go down the tunnels, find them, and get rid of them. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We're going to send people out with them for that war against the administrative state reporting. And we want to bring these stories to you. So you know who is actually running this country, right? These people whose names you don't know, who are they and how can we get rid of them?
Yeah, and we have Chris Bedford on the show all the time. Rebecca Zelko, she's out there, congressmen are out there retweeting her stuff left and right these days. So it's really exciting to see the DC team that we have built already.
Yeah, I mean, Chris is a longtime legendary friend. He's great. And then Rebecca came on, and we'll do more. I mean, we need to build more there, and it's an excellent team. And I think what's important for people to realize is there's just not a lot of people on the right who have the perspective that they do. A lot of these places, they didn't even vote for Trump, some of our competitors. So, some of the people working there. So this is going to be a very interesting year.
It is. 2025, interesting. As you say, you always say volatility will increase. We will look for that in 2025 as well. So if you want to follow along, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you catch everything from Blaze News Tonight. That's going to do it for us here tonight. We'll see you back here to break it all down tomorrow.